Can a single act of kindness change 2 lives forever? Get in, or you'll freeze out here, Malcolm said, leaning over to push open the passenger door of his pickup, the engine humming softly beneath the rain. The woman standing in the middle of the road flinched at the sound of his voice. Her head snapped toward him, eyes wide, not in surprise, but fear. Real sudden fear. She took a step back, clutching her bag to her chest like a shield. Malcolm kept his hands on the steering wheel, palms open. His voice stayed low, steady, like he was talking to a spooked horse. I ain't going to hurt you, he said gently. Just offering a ride. You look like you need it. She shook her head slightly, her chest rising and falling fast. Her coat was soaked clean through, and the wind was pushing the rain sideways now, slicing across her like needles. But she didn't move toward the truck. Malcolm sighed, his breath fogging the windshield. Look, he said, still calm. This ain't the kind of road you want to be standing on come nightfall. I got Stu at home, a dry place to sit. You don't got to say a word. Just get warm. That's it. For a moment, she looked torn between bolting and collapsing. Her knuckles whitened on the strap of her bag. She glanced at the tree line behind her, then at him again. Then the thunder cracked, a loud, deep, rolling sound that made the trees shudder and her whole body jump. Her breath caught. Her knees buckled just slightly. Okay, she said, voice barely above the rain. Okay, she moved slowly, cautiously, eyes still locked on him as she climbed into the truck. She shut the door with a soft thunk and curled into herself, her whole body tense. I'm Malcolm, he said after a beat, keeping his voice soft. You don't have to tell me yours unless you want to. She didn't answer right away. Her hair was plastered to her face and her hands were trembling as she wiped rain from her cheeks. Finally, she whispered, Claire. He nodded. All right, Claire. You're safe now. The truck rumbled forward, its headlights slicing through the gray dusk. They rode in silence, the windshield wipers squeaking in rhythm, the rain only getting harder. I got a place just up the road, Malcolm said. Walker Farm. Not fancy, but there's dry towels and food. My mom's there, too, so you'll know I ain't the only soul under that roof. Claire gave the smallest nod, but she didn't look at him. He could feel the weight of her silence. Could practically hear the questions spinning in her head. Who was this man? Why had he stopped? What would he want in return? But Malcolm didn't press. They turned off the main road onto a gravel drive flanked by bare pecan trees. At the top of a slight hill stood a weathered farmhouse with a wraparound porch and a light glowing from the kitchen window. He pulled beside the barn and pointed toward the small cabin out back. You'll stay there. Got heat. Bathroom works. I'll bring you some blankets and food. Claire finally turned to him and her voice cracked when she asked, Why are you doing this? He looked out the windshield at the falling night. Because you looked like you needed someone to stop. That's all. A long pause. Then she reached for the door and stepped out into the mud. That night, Malcolm brought a tray with hot beef stew, cornbread, and sweet tea to the guest cabin. She opened the door without a word, took it, and nodded once. Her eyes were still guarded, but no longer frantic. Later, back in the main house, Malcolm checked on his mother. Ruth lay in her bed, one hand resting on the edge of her quilt. She's still out there, she rasped. Yeah, he said. She's in the guest cabin. Ruth was quiet for a moment, then blinked slowly. Good. In the small cabin, Claire sat with the warm bowl in her lap, steam curling around her face. She stared at the wall, her thoughts 1,000 miles away. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't see the rain anymore. She saw a stranger's face, not threatening, just steady, and a truck that had stopped when no one else would. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was something. And in her world, that was rare. What secrets will unravel as their bond grows stronger? Real Stories Diary. The smell of rain-soaked earth lingered in the air the next morning as Claire awoke to faint sunlight leaking through the thin curtains of the guest cabin. For a long moment, she lay still, curled beneath the warm quilt Malcolm had left folded at the foot of the bed. The stew bowl from last night sat empty on the nightstand. Her fingers brushed the rim of the tray, still warm with memory. She wasn't used to waking somewhere safe. Her shoes, placed neatly by the door, had dried overnight. Her bag, still zipped tight and tucked under the bed, remained untouched. That small fact settled something tight in her chest. At the main house, Malcolm stood by the stove, flipping bacon in a cast-iron skillet. The scent of black coffee, hickory smoke, and grease filled the kitchen, mixing with the faint sound of his mother's soft humming from her room down the hall. He moved without noise. His hands practiced. It was Saturday. Chores would wait until after breakfast. At 8 sharp, he tapped lightly on the cabin door and stepped back. Clare opened it a crack. Her hair was damp from the shower, face bare, eyes cautious but clearer. "I made breakfast," he said. "You don't have to eat with us. But you're welcome." She hesitated. "Us?" "My mama, Ruth. She don't say much these days, but she appreciates company." Clare glanced over his shoulder toward the house, then back at him. She wasn't used to being invited. Not without suspicion, not without strings. Still, she nodded. "I'll come inside." The kitchen was warm with morning light and something gentler, a kind of rooted calm that settled in the old floorboards. Ruth sat in a high-backed chair beside the window, a wool shawl draped over her shoulders. Her gray hair was neatly braided down her back, and her eyes, though dulled by the stroke, sparked with a flicker of recognition as Clare stepped in. "She's real pretty," Ruth murmured, her voice soft and uneven. Malcolm smiled faintly. "Mama, this is Clare. She's going to sit with us this morning." Clare walked slowly toward the table, unsure where to place herself. She sat at the far end, careful not to impose. Breakfast passed mostly in silence, save for the occasional clink of a fork or the slow murmur of Ruth's humming. Clare ate quietly but gratefully, scrambled eggs, grits, buttered toast, and thick bacon crisped just right. "You cook like someone raised by a southern grandma," she said without thinking. Malcolm shrugged. "She taught me well. My daddy passed young. Was just us." Clare nodded. "Mine left. Never came back." They didn't speak after that, but something shifted, softened between them. After breakfast, Clare stood to help with dishes, but Malcolm waved her off. "You're not staff," he said. "You're a guest." "I can still contribute," she replied, not unkindly. "It's been a while since I felt useful." He hesitated, then handed her a towel. "Then you dry. I'll wash." They moved around the small kitchen like people relearning a dance. Familiar in silence, she asked about the farm. He told her free-range chickens, a few head of cattle, peach trees that hadn't borne fruit in 2 seasons, a busted tractor he kept fixing because he couldn't afford a new one. Outside, the sun broke through in slanted beams, drying the muddy ground in golden streaks. Malcolm opened the back door and motioned her toward the yard. "You feel up to meeting the girls?" Clare blinked. "Girls?" He nodded toward the coop. "The hens? I named them after jazz singers. Ella's the loud one. Billy's always broody." A smile tugged at her lips. The first real one since she'd arrived. "Lead the way." The air was fresh and sharp as they stepped out. The chickens clucked in greeting, pecking around the coop like queens of their domain. Clare knelt beside the fence, watching them. "They're peaceful," she said. "More than some people I know," Malcolm muttered. She looked over her shoulder at him. "Do you always take in strays?" He paused. "Just the ones who look like they've forgotten they're worth saving." Clare didn't respond, but the words lingered. Later that afternoon, while Malcolm repaired a section of fencing, Clare sat on the porch with Ruth. She offered to massage the old woman's hands, surprised when Ruth nodded almost immediately. Her fingers were trained, precise, gentle pressure along the stiff joints, rhythmic kneading up the forearms. Ruth's eyes fluttered closed. "You used to do this?" Malcolm asked from the doorway, arms crossed. "Physical therapy, mostly elderly care. Stroke recovery. She's been stiff for months." You're the first she's let touch her like that. I think she's lonely. Lonelier than even she knows. So are you, he said softly. Claire's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed. You don't know me. I know what people look like when they stop believing in soft landings. She swallowed hard as the sky dimmed toward dusk. Claire stood to return to the cabin. Thanks for letting me stay. Malcolm held the door open. You can stay longer. No strings. She looked at him, unsure whether to trust the offer. But behind him, Ruth lifted a hand, low, shaky, but deliberate, waved. Claire's breath caught. She waved back, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like a ghost. That night, as she lay beneath the quilt, the rain started again, soft, steady, like a memory falling back into place. She pressed her hand to her chest over the place that had gone cold long ago. It didn't feel so empty now. The next morning brought a gray stillness to the farm. Fog hung low over the fields like a thin blanket, and the dew clung to every blade of grass. Claire stepped out of the cabin, wrapped in one of Ruth's old cardigans, the sleeves too long for her arms. Her boots made soft prints in the damp earth as she walked toward the main house. Inside, she found Malcolm at the dining table, sorting through a worn stack of bills. His brow was furrowed, a pencil between his teeth. He looked up as she entered, the frown melting instantly. Morning, he said, nodding toward the coffee pot. It's fresh. Claire poured herself a mug. Everything all right? He hesitated, then folded the bills into a neat pile. Just the usual dance with the electric company. I pay a little. They threatened to cut me off. I pay a little more. Claire didn't press. Instead, she sat across from him, sipping her coffee. Silence stretched between them. Comfortable now. Like a blanket, they both pulled around their shoulders. I can help, she said suddenly. With the bills, he chuckled softly. Appreciate it, but I wouldn't feel right. No, she said, with your mother. Malcolm's eyes lifted. I noticed she favors her left side, Claire continued. She's got partial control of the right, but it's weakened. If you let me work with her an hour a day, we can rebuild some of her function, maybe even her speech. He blinked. You do that? She gave a small shrug. I need to do something. I need to remember who I was before. Everything. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, watching her. All right, he said after a beat. We'll give it a shot. That afternoon, Claire began her sessions with Ruth. At first, it was just simple stretches. Ruth was resistant, her body stiff and slow to respond. But Claire's touch was patient, her voice soft, coaxing each finger to move, each joint to release. By the third session, Ruth's hand could close around a rubber ball. By the fifth, she smiled when Claire entered the room. Malcolm watched from the doorway most days, arms crossed, quiet, but his eyes were never still. They followed Claire's every move, the way she crouched to adjust a knee brace, how she praised Ruth's smallest victories like they were gold medals. One morning, Claire brought music into the room, jazz, soft, steady rhythms. Ruth's eyes lit up at the sound. She likes Billie Holiday, Malcolm said, leaning against the doorframe. Claire smiled. She's got taste. The days began to settle into a rhythm. Claire helped with chores in the morning, worked with Ruth in the afternoon, and in the evenings, she and Malcolm shared dinner. Sometimes quiet, sometimes laughing, always easy. One Thursday night, as a storm rolled in, they sat together on the porch, listening to the low rumble of thunder. Why'd you leave your job? Malcolm asked quietly, eyes on the horizon. Claire hesitated. Her fingers curled tighter around her mug. I didn't leave. I was forced out. He turned to look at her but said nothing. I was working at a private rehab clinic, she said slowly. The patient was the son of a powerful man. He wasn't responding to treatment. I told the family the truth, politely but honestly. She paused, her voice tightening. 2 weeks later, I was accused of misconduct. No evidence, just whispers. They said I was inappropriate. She looked down. The board didn't even question it. I was gone before I could defend myself. Malcolm, you ever fight it? I tried, but the system, when you're just a woman, and the accusation is enough to stain you, doesn't care about the truth. Silence fell between them. The thunder cracked again. I'm sorry, he said. Claire glanced at him. Don't be. I needed to fall apart. I didn't know it then, but now maybe I do. He nodded. Sometimes the storm clears out what needed breaking. They sat in the hush that followed. The only sound the tapping of rain against the tin roof. Later that night, Claire couldn't sleep. She stood by the cabin window, watching lightning spider across the sky. Her chest felt tight, not with fear, but something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The next morning, she found Malcolm in the barn, wrestling with a jammed feed machine. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, hands greasy and scratched. Need help, she called. He looked up and grinned. Got a PhD in mechanical engineering hiding under that therapist's badge? Try me. Together, they worked the bolts loose, her small hands reaching where his couldn't. At one point, he reached past her, their shoulders brushing, and they both froze. For a second, neither spoke. Then the machine rattled to life. Claire grinned. You owe me. I'll add it to your tab, he said, voice low. They didn't talk about the moment again, but it sat between them now, warm, unspoken, waiting. That evening, Ruth sat up straighter than she had in weeks. Claire helped her to the porch, bundling her in a blanket. Sunset's beautiful, Ruth murmured. It is, Claire agreed. Malcolm came out with a bowl of peach cobbler in 2 spoons. He handed one to Claire, then passed the bowl to his mother. She took it with a shaky smile. Not bad for a girl with nowhere to go, he said, glancing sideways at Claire. She nudged him gently. Not bad for a man who thinks chickens are jazz legends. They laughed, and for the first time, the porch didn't feel like a place to escape the rain. It felt like home. The air was crisp the next morning, carrying the scent of hay and wood smoke. Claire stepped into the barn with purpose, a leather-bound notebook tucked under her arm and a towel draped around her neck. She found Malcolm up on a ladder fixing a bulb that had long since given up its ghost. Morning, she said, looking up at him. He grunted in greeting, fiddling with the socket. You're up early. I promised Ruth I'd try a new hand strength routine with her today. Thought I'd review the plan first. She opened the notebook, flipping through detailed sketches of muscle groups, target exercises, and notes on Ruth's progress. He climbed down, wiping his hands on a rag. You always this meticulous? Claire smiled, half proud, half sheepish. Used to be part of my job to plan 2 weeks ahead, adjust on the fly, and justify every stretch with a medical reason. He looked at her. Serious now. You were good at it, weren't you? I was, she said quietly. Ruth was sitting upright in her recliner when Claire entered the living room. A soft instrumental track played from an old stereo, and sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, giving the room a golden warmth. Claire knelt beside her, placing a soft foam ball in Ruth's hand. All right, Miss Ruth, she said, her tone light but focused. Let's show this little ball who's boss today. Ruth smirked, then slowly began to squeeze. It was the first day she didn't need a verbal cue. Claire's eyes shone. Malcolm stood in the doorway, unnoticed for a moment, watching the 2 women. His mother, once a proud, sharp-tongued matriarch, reduced to quiet stares, gritting her teeth now, trying to raise her right arm. Claire held her elbow, encouraging her, whispering praise with every centimeter of movement. That afternoon, while hauling buckets from the well, Malcolm turned to Claire, who was adjusting the gate hinge nearby. Would you want to stay? He asked. She paused, eyes narrowing slightly. You mean longer than a few days? He nodded. Maybe a few weeks, maybe more. Claire didn't answer right away. The idea lingered, warm and dangerous. I'd like that, she said finally. If you're sure? I am, he said. This place has been quiet too long. That night they sat out on the porch again, but this time it was different. The silences had shaped to them now like two people listening to the same melody from opposite ends of a room. Claire sipped her tea while Malcolm tuned the old radio beside him. Static flickered between country songs and baseball games. "You know," she said, "when I was little, I used to think farms were like fairy tales. Rolling hills, sunflowers, family dogs." Malcolm raised a brow. "You were lied to." She laughed. Clearly, there was a beat of silence. Then she said almost absently, "I think I could fix the broken handrail on the side porch. It's bothering me." He looked at her, really looked, and smiled. "Be my guest." The following days passed in a rhythm both new and oddly familiar. Claire tended to Ruth, helped with feed runs, even repaired the creaky porch rail with the precision of a woman used to fixing things in town. Malcolm introduced her to the local hardware clerk, to the grocer who always forgot to label the peaches, and to the mailman who asked if she was the girl who wandered in from the storm. Claire merely smiled. Something like that. But behind the ease of smiles and small talk, something heavier brewed. One evening while sorting old books in a storage shed, Claire stumbled upon a dusty metal box. Curiosity took hold. Inside she found faded photographs: Ruth in her youth, Malcolm in a football jersey, and a man she didn't recognize, sharply dressed, standing in front of the same farmhouse. His arm was slung casually around Ruth's shoulder, but there was a distance in her eyes. Claire heard footsteps behind her. "That's my father," Malcolm said. Claire turned, startled. He looked different. Malcolm's jaw tightened. "He left when I was 12. Took the truck, the savings, and didn't even leave a note. Just disappeared." Claire gently closed the box. "I'm sorry." He nodded, his voice low. "It's just me and Mama now. Has been for a long time." That night, as Malcolm fixed a loose gutter under the stars, Claire wandered out with 2 glasses of cold sweet tea. "Your mother asked me to play her music again tomorrow," she said. Malcolm took the glass. "She doesn't ask people for things. Not unless she trusts them." Claire hesitated, then said, "I think I trust you, too." The words hung in the air. Malcolm met her eyes, something flickering behind his. "You know, I've spent a long time thinking nobody would ever choose to stay. People come here when they're lost. They leave when they find their way again." Claire looked down, her voice soft. "What if I'm still finding my way?" The wind stirred the trees. Somewhere inside, Ruth coughed. Malcolm stepped closer, his tone gentler than she'd ever heard. "Then stay as long as you need, and if you ever want to leave, I'll help you find the road out." Claire looked up at him, her heart unsteady. "What if I don't want to leave?" He didn't answer. But the way he looked at her then, like she was the first sunrise after a long drought, said everything. Neither of them moved. They didn't need to. The silence spoke for them, and for once it was enough. The following week unfolded with a tenderness neither Claire nor Malcolm dared to name. Mornings began with the scent of fresh cornbread in Ruth's slow, deliberate movements in the sunroom, her fingers curling more confidently around the foam ball, her voice cracking out 2-word sentences like "too tight" or "more tea." Claire became part of the household's rhythm, feeding chickens at dawn, heating compresses at noon, jotting medical notes in a spiral journal by lamplight. But one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the barn in liquid amber, Claire stood at the kitchen window, frozen. A silver SUV pulled into the long gravel driveway. Her eyes narrowed. The plates were out of state, no dust on the tires, and the man who stepped out wore a pressed suit too clean for this side of Georgia. Expecting anyone, she asked Malcolm as he passed behind her, drying his hands on a dish rag. He glanced out, his brow furrowed. Not at all. Claire's fingers tightened on the sink's edge. The man approached with a slow, calculated stride and knocked 3 polite, measured raps. Claire's breath hitched. Malcolm opened the door, but Claire was already halfway down the hall, her posture alert. "Can I help you?" Malcolm asked, stepping onto the porch. The man smiled thinly. "I'm looking for Claire Whitmore." Claire appeared in the doorway. Her expression, half fury, half dread, stopped the man mid-sentence. Dr. Whitmore, he corrected himself, lips twitching. I was hoping for a moment of your time. Malcolm looked between them. You know him? She didn't respond right away. Then, this is Dr. Langston. He's from my old clinic. Langston's smile tightened. I represent the board of physicians overseeing your review. Malcolm stepped forward. This isn't the place. But Claire raised a hand. It's all right. Let him speak. Langston pulled a crisp envelope from his jacket and handed it to her. The review is closed. Charges were dropped. There will be no permanent mark on your record. The patient's family withdrew their complaint. Claire blinked. Why are you here then? I came because the board recommended reinstatement, but I also came because I wanted to see for myself why someone with your reputation vanished into the rural South. Malcolm bristled. That's none of your business. Claire opened the letter. Her eyes scanned the page, but the words blurred with memory, the mother's screaming in the ER, the flatline tone, the unbearable silence. Afterward, Langston stepped back, his voice softening. You were one of the best. Come back, Claire. The hospital wants you. You have a second chance. With that, he turned and walked away. They stood in silence as the SUV disappeared down the dirt road. Claire's fingers crushed the envelope. Later, on the porch, she sat beside Malcolm, silent for a long while. The sun had slipped below the hills, leaving only the whisper of crickets and the creak of the swing. I made a mistake, she said finally. A patient coded. I made a call. It was the wrong one. Malcolm said nothing. I tried to fix it, but the family blamed me. So did the board. So did I. She looked at him then. I ran. He nodded slowly. Now you have a choice. She exhaled sharply. That's what scares me. I thought running would erase it. But it followed me here. No, Malcolm said, his voice low. It didn't follow you. You brought it, and now you can face it. Claire stared into the dark horizon. And leave this? You wouldn't be leaving, he said. You'd just be seeing where this leads. A pause. Then from the shadows, Ruth's voice croaked out, startling them both. Don't waste a second chance. Claire turned. Ruth sat in her wheelchair behind the screen door, eyes watery but sharp. The next morning, Claire rose early. The smell of fresh biscuits hung in the air. Ruth's favorite gospel tune played faintly from the record player. Malcolm stood at the sink scrubbing mugs. Claire walked in, her backpack slung over one shoulder. He turned. You heading somewhere? She hesitated. Just the clinic in town. I need to see something for myself. He didn't stop her, just nodded. Downtown, the small medical center sat like a stone relic, familiar and foreign. Claire stepped inside. The receptionist looked up and froze. CLA, hi, Dana, she said softly. Dana stared a moment longer, then smiled. You came back. I'm not sure for how long. The administrator's office smelled of lemon cleaner and old papers. Claire sat across from a man in a blue vest who didn't bother hiding his surprise. I heard, he said. Langston called. I'm not here for that, Claire said. Not yet. I just wanted to ask if I could observe, volunteer, help where needed, just to remember who I used to be. He studied her. You've got 3 open shifts in triage. You want one? She nodded. I'll be back tomorrow. That evening, she returned to the farm with dirt on her shoes and tiredness in her bones, but a weight had lifted. She found Malcolm fixing a fence post, his hands caked in mud. How was the clinic? He asked without looking up. I saw a girl with a broken wrist. She cried like the world was ending. I wrapped it, made a joke, and she laughed. He looked at her now. She laughed, Claire repeated softer. Malcolm gave a crooked smile. Sounds like the beginning of something. She shrugged. Or maybe just a reminder. That night, as they ate dinner, Ruth suddenly reached across the table and patted Claire's hand. "Welcome home," she rasped. Claire's eyes shimmered. Maybe, just maybe, home wasn't a place you ran to or from. Maybe it was the space between healing and hope, the place where second chances didn't feel like judgments, but like gifts. And maybe, just maybe, this was hers. The sky over the farm stretched wide and golden as autumn crept in, quietly burning the edges of the cottonwood trees with orange and amber. Clare had now been volunteering at the local clinic for almost a month. And though her presence there stirred whispers and sidelong glances at first, she was beginning to hear her name spoken with gratitude rather than caution. But it was in the quiet, familiar routines of the farm where her healing truly lived. In the soft clink of dishes while Malcolm washed them beside her, in Ruth's gruff, one-word encouragements as she squeezed the therapy ball with more strength than ever. In the long evenings, sitting on the porch swing, listening to frogs echo across the fields. One afternoon, after driving Ruth to a follow-up at the nearby neurologist's office, Claire returned home to find a pickup truck parked under the oak tree by the barn. She didn't recognize it. The windows were tinted. Malcolm was crouched by the shed, hammering something into place. He looked up, squinted toward the truck, and stood. Claire followed his gaze. The driver's door opened, and a tall, heavy-set man stepped out. He wore an old sheriff's badge on his belt and the kind of arrogance that didn't need a uniform to carry weight. Claire froze. Malcolm didn't. "Afternoon, Pete," he said, his tone civil, but cool. Pete Remmer, the county sheriff, and not a friend. Claire instinctively stepped closer to Malcolm, not out of fear, but readiness. The last time she saw that badge was during a rough moment at the clinic, a time when Pete had come to question a black teenager who'd been wrongfully accused of stealing medication. Malcolm had been there that day, too. She hadn't forgotten the heat in his voice. Pete spit to the side, glanced at Claire. "Didn't expect to see you still around, document." "I live here now," she said evenly. "Right," he smirked. "Just came to pass along some news. Thought it might interest you, Malcolm." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "What kind of news?" Pete looked toward the road, then back again. "Your cousin Ray's been poking around town asking about this place." Malcolm's jaw tensed. "Ray knows he's not welcome here." "Well," Pete said, tipping his hat back. "Folks don't always respect fences. Just figured you'd want to know. You've got a lot of valuable land here. And from what I hear, some good company, too." His eyes flicked toward Claire with a look that made her stomach tighten. "That's enough," Malcolm said, stepping forward slightly. "You've said what you came to say." Pete's face shifted. Something harder surfaced, but he nodded, turned back to his truck, and drove off without another word. As the dust settled behind him, Claire exhaled. "Ray?" she asked gently. Malcolm was silent for a beat, then turned back toward the shed. "My mother's sister's boy grew up mean, stayed mean, tried to steal the property years ago when Ruth had her first health scare. He's got friends in low places, and he's not afraid of bending the law." Claire crossed her arms. "And Pete?" "Pete likes power and doesn't like seeing a black man keep land that white hands once." That night, Claire couldn't sleep. Her mind churned with questions, with images of Malcolm standing tall against men who wanted to tear down what he'd built. She walked quietly through the dark hallway and found him outside sitting on the porch steps wrapped in a flannel jacket, staring at the stars. She sat beside him without speaking for a long while. Then finally, "You know you don't always have to carry this alone." He looked at her. She continued, voice soft but sure. "You let me stay. You let me help Ruth. You let me find myself again. Now, let me help you keep this place safe." His eyes flickered with something unreadable, pain, maybe pride, and something tender. "You think I don't want to lean on someone," he said, voice low. "But every time I did, it cost me." Claire leaned in slightly, close enough that her voice was just for him. "Then let me be the one who doesn't." In the days that followed, she noticed Malcolm become more guarded about her and more about the boundaries of his world. He double-checked the locks on the gates, installed a new camera above the main barn. Ruth noticed, too. One morning, while Claire helped her with her stretches, Ruth grunted and said, "The boy's been scared since his daddy died. Always watches the shadows." Claire nodded. "But maybe he doesn't have to anymore." That afternoon, while Malcolm was tending the back pasture, Claire drove into town, not to the clinic, but to the local attorney's office. She left with a manila folder pressed against her chest and a quiet determination in her jaw. That evening, after supper, she laid the folder on the kitchen table and opened it. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "I added myself to the land trust," she said, voice calm, "as co-caretaker, just until Ruth recovers." He stared at her. "Claire, no." "Listen," she interrupted gently. "If Ray or anyone else comes sniffing around with a plan to force something, medical claim, legal ownership, family trickery, it'll be harder with me there. I know the law. I know how these people think." He remained silent, she added. "You didn't ask for this, but you don't have to be alone in it either." After a long pause, he reached for the folder, flipping through the pages, the signature lines, the notarization, and then without a word, he stood, walked to her, and wrapped his arms around her, firm, grateful. Neither of them said a thing for the rest of the night. But something between them had changed. Not just trust. It was the beginning of something unspoken, but undeniable. A shared line in the dirt, a silent vow, a promise that neither storm nor shadow would break what they were starting to build. Together, the morning broke with a deep chill in the air, the kind that signaled the heart of fall had arrived in Arkansas. Claire pulled her scarf tighter around her neck as she stepped out onto the porch, her breath turning to mist. From where she stood, she could see Malcolm in the distance, hauling feed buckets toward the barn, his steps deliberate, but slightly slower than usual. The farm, once just a refuge, had become something deeper. It was now rhythm and purpose, a heartbeat she moved in sync with. But today, something felt off. Inside, Ruth was uncharacteristically quiet. As Claire helped her through her morning stretches, the older woman paused mid-grip of the therapy bar and whispered, "He's hiding something. I can tell." Claire didn't respond right away, adjusting the support under Ruth's elbow. "You know," Ruth continued. "Malcolm's always been the strong type, silent, too, like his father. But when he starts closing doors behind him, it means the past is stirring." Claire looked at her. "Do you know what that past holds?" Ruth exhaled, her voice turning into a low rasp. "Enough to know he's scared of losing more than land." Later that afternoon, Claire found Malcolm at the back fence, surveying the far woods. His brow was furrowed, the corners of his mouth tight. She approached quietly, placing a thermos of hot cider on the fence post beside him. He nodded a thank you, but didn't look her way. "Talk to me," she said, her voice soft. "There's been movement," he replied after a pause. "Neighbor said someone's been camping just outside the property line. Ray, maybe, or someone working for him." Claire's stomach twisted. "You think they'll try something?" "They always try something," he muttered, then finally turned to face her. "But I won't let them take what's left of my family." "Malcolm," she reached out, her fingers brushing his jacket sleeve. "We're not waiting for them to act first, are we?" He hesitated. "I've been looking into legal reinforcements. Boundary reinforcements, too." Claire's eyes narrowed. "You mean traps?" "No," he said firmly. "Nothing like that, but motion sensors, floodlights, maybe a few quiet friends from back in the army who owe me favors." Her heart tightened. "You shouldn't have to go to war to keep your home." "I'm not going to war," he said, gaze steady. "I'm protecting what's mine." The silence between them stretched, broken only by the rustle of dry leaves. Then Claire stepped closer. "Let me help. I mean, really help, not just paperwork. I want to be part of this. Not watching from the porch." He looked down at her, the tension in his shoulders beginning to ease. "You already are." That night, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in bruised purples and burnt gold, Claire stood in the old loft with Malcolm, helping him install a small camera that overlooked the rear pasture. "This place means more to you than just land," she said as she held the ladder steady. He looked down at her. "It's memory. It's sacrifice. My father worked 2 jobs to buy every acre. My mother nearly lost her life giving birth to me in that house. Every beam, every stone is someone's struggle. Claire felt the weight of that in her chest. And then with a breath, she said the thing she'd been holding in. I know what it's like to lose everything and not be able to stop it. Malcolm paused halfway through screwing in the mount. She continued, my brother was sick, early onset ALS. I was fresh out of med school, ready to change the world. I threw everything at trying to help him, research, experimental programs, you name it. But I couldn't save him. Malcolm came down the ladder slowly, quietly. He was the only family I had left, she said, her voice catching. After he died, I shut down, gave up the clinic. That's how I ended up wandering in the rain that night you found me. He stepped closer, gently touching her arm. You weren't lost. You were just between. Claire looked up at him, eyes glossy. And you pulled me back. They stood in silence for a long moment, wrapped in dusk and unspoken understanding. But just as they turned to go, the farm dogs erupted in furious barking near the west end of the property. Malcolm moved first, motioning for Claire to stay close as he grabbed his flashlight from the barn wall. They reached the tree line in minutes. The dogs circled something, a pile of broken branches and tire tracks. Malcolm scanned the ground, jaw clenched. Someone's been here. Claire knelt beside the disturbed soil. Looks fresh. Maybe within the hour. Malcolm stood still, calculating. He's testing the perimeter. She looked up. Then what do we do now? We finish securing the land. Tomorrow I'll bring in extra help. And we alert Pete. Claire's eyes hardened. You think he'll do anything? Malcolm's voice was low. He may not act, but I want it on record. Back at the house, Ruth was waiting by the window in her robe, eyes sharp. He's here, isn't he? She said as they entered. Malcolm nodded. He's watching, but I'm watching back. Claire helped Ruth back to bed later. But as she pulled the blanket over the older woman, Ruth gripped her wrist tightly. You've changed my son, she whispered. I can see it. Claire smiled softly. He's changed me, too. That night, Claire sat by the fireplace long after Malcolm had gone to bed. The flame danced low, casting flickers of gold against the dark wood walls. She held a photo she'd found in Ruth's old keepsake box, Malcolm as a boy, grinning beside a younger Ruth, both in overalls, dirt-streaked and beaming. This was more than a farm. It was legacy, and now it was hers to help defend. Outside in the distance, the wind stirred through the trees, carrying with it the faintest sound of tires crunching gravel. Claire stood. She was ready. The sun hadn't yet risen when Malcolm stirred awake, the faint hum of the security alarm echoing in the stillness. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed and reached for the rifle he kept locked behind the dresser. The alarm had triggered on the western boundary, the same area they'd found disturbed just hours earlier. As he made his way downstairs, he wasn't surprised to find Claire already in the kitchen, fully dressed, sipping from a mug. I heard it too, she said quietly, setting the cup down. Westfield, he nodded. Camera caught movement. Probably nothing, but I'm not taking chances. Claire grabbed her coat. I'm coming with you. No, Malcolm said quickly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Let me handle this. You promised we were in this together, she said, eyes firm. I'm not letting you go out there alone. The argument died on his lips. He saw it in her dazed resolve, not recklessness. By the time they reached the west fence, dawn had barely touched the horizon. Malcolm scanned the area with his flashlight, sweeping over tall grass, old fence posts, and finally footprints, heavy ones, leading straight to the cattle shed. He raised a hand for Claire to stay back. Then slowly approached the open structure. The doors were ajar. Inside, hay was scattered. A few tools were overturned, but there was no one. Then he saw a message carved roughly into the wood beam. Last warning. Malcolm's jaw clenched. He stepped back and turned toward Claire. Ray's not just watching. He's getting bolder. She frowned. So what now? We call the sheriff and we reinforce everything. But when Sheriff Clay finally arrived, an aging man with a limp and a reputation for siding with whoever paid the most, his reaction was tepid at best. You sure it's not just kids? The sheriff mumbled, squinting at the carved threat. Kids don't leave threats at the same spot twice in a week, Malcolm said through gritted teeth. You know who's behind this? Clay sighed. Look, Malcolm, without proof, there's not much I can do. Ray's got a lot of pull in town. You're going to need more than a footprint and a hunch. Claire stepped forward, her voice sharp. And when that warning turns into a fire, or worse? The sheriff looked away. I'll make a note of it. After he left, the weight of powerlessness settled over them like wet wool. Malcolm paced outside, fury simmering beneath his skin. Claire stood nearby, arms crossed, watching him. You ever feel like the law is just another weapon in the wrong hands? He asked. All the time, she replied. That night, the three of them sat around the dining table in silence. Ruth, after a long pause, spoke up. There's something I need to show you. She gestured toward the hallway. Malcolm helped her to the bookshelf in the study where she pressed a hand against the side panel. With a faint click, the false back opened to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside was a dusty file box labeled in faded ink. Property 1970. I didn't think it mattered anymore, Ruth said softly, but maybe it does now. Inside the box were old deeds, maps, and letters, some handwritten, others typed on aging paper. Among them was a notarized letter from Malcolm's grandfather detailing a private loan Ray's father had defaulted on during a drought year. It had forced the original Granger family to sell off part of the land. Ray's father had tried to contest the sale, but failed in court. Claire's eyes widened as she read, Malcolm, this proves your family didn't just buy the land, they saved it from foreclosure. Ray's been trying to reclaim what his father lost, Malcolm stared at the document. And all this time he's been playing victim. Claire nodded. And trying to rewrite history with intimidation. The next morning, Malcolm drove into town with Claire at his side. The box of documents on the seat between them, they headed straight to the office of Anna McCullough, a local lawyer known for going toe-to-toe with the powerful. Anna examined the documents with growing interest. These are solid. This changes everything. If Ray makes one more move, we can hit him with a harassment suit and take it public. But that's not enough, Malcolm said. He needs to be exposed. Not just for me, for every neighbor he's ever pushed around. Anna smiled slightly. Then let's give the town something they can't ignore. Within days, a town meeting was scheduled. Word spread fast, mostly thanks to Ruth's old friends at the church and Claire's subtle, persistent conversations with townsfolk at the market. That Friday evening, the community hall buzzed with whispers. Ray sat near the back, arms folded, jaw tight. Claire sat beside Malcolm in the front row, the box of papers on the table. Anna took the podium and laid out the story, quiet but powerful, the debt, the legal transfer, the history rewritten by intimidation. She passed out copies of the deeds, read excerpts aloud, and finally projected an image of the carved last warning message. Silence fell over the room. Then Ruth in her wheelchair rolled forward, speaking into the microphone with the quiet authority of a matriarch. Justice isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about truth. Truth that's been buried too long. No one applauded, but no one argued either. Ray stood and walked out, his boots echoing against the floor. The sheriff followed moments later, his face unreadable. Malcolm turned to Claire, breath caught in his throat. We did it. Claire smiled. No, you did it. I just stood beside you. Malcolm took her hand, his voice low. You stood beside me when no one else would. I don't think I could ever forget that. She leaned her head against his shoulder. The tension of weeks finally lifting. Outside the hall, the first stars appeared above the quiet fields. Back at the farm, Ruth fell asleep by the fire, a smile tugging at her lips. And on the porch, Claire looked at the man beside her, heart open, fears finally quiet. You know, she said. I came here lost. I never expected to find home again. Malcolm looked out across the land his father died protecting. Then maybe we both saved something. The night deepened and the world, for once, felt whole. Real Stories Diary.